Hey guys, I've been threatening to make this video for a long time. I want to give us an illustration, just kind of a picture of the gospel. Of course, when Jesus used the word gospel, he was talking about his whole story. And even bigger than that, he was talking about how his whole story connected with the whole story of humanity. I'm obviously not going to tell that whole story. I'm going to do a summary, an illustration. I'm actually going to do two illustrations because there's a way that it's been told across our country for years. And I think it is being told a little bit better today. So I want to share these two versions, and please understand, when I share the first one and then push it to the side, I'm not pushing a whole school of theology to the side. I'm not pushing anybody's faith to the side, not one bit. In fact, the first version is so good. If that's all you had, it's enough. It is the most beautiful picture our world has ever had of a deity, of the divine, of God. But the second version is even better. So bear with me to the end. You've got to watch them both. Both fairly biblical. When I say the second version is better, I don't mean it's better like it makes me feel better. I think it's an actually better reflection of the heart of God as the Bible tells the story. So I didn't make this idea up. This came from an Orthodox priest. I do it very different than he does, but definitely he was the inspiration of this picture. So here we go. You guys ready? In the beginning, there was God. God in my story is represented by this cute little blue chair. Of course, God is not really a cute little blue chair. I'm doing what the Bible does all the time, just using something to stand in for God. In the beginning, God created. I mean everything. With the breath of his mouth, with the words from his lips, God created. But of all the things that were things that he created, one thing rose above the rest. Yeah, that's us. This little blue chair represents humanity, you, me, and every other human that has lived. God is love. John tells us that. God is love, and love has to be in relationship. Love is also a choice. It must be freely chosen. You know that, I know that. Love isn't something that can be forced, otherwise you lose the whole concept of love. So because of that, God gave humanity the choice to turn their backs on him or to turn towards him and be in relationship. Well, you know the story. Everyone knows the story. Humanity, starting with Adam and Eve, turned their backs on God. They went their own way. God came knocking on their door. Hello. And then Cain and Abel turned and went their own way. And again, humanity turned its face from God. And God, because, well, God is love, but he's also holy and justice. He's also a righteous judge. So God turned his back on humanity. That is a tragic picture. But God is love. And so he sent his son, Jesus, to sit in the human chair, to represent us, to fill in for us. And oh, buddy, did he ever. Jesus wore the skin and the flesh and the teeth and the bones and the hair and the eyeballs of humanity in a way that no one had ever done before. He was a perfect human. He was amazing. He had an ability to control the elements, the wind and the waves and bread and fishes, and change water to wine. Even seemed to have mastery over life and death. Nobody had ever lived this way, and it threatened the powers. So they killed him, me, you, and all of humanity, put him on a cross and murdered him. He became our sin, so to speak. Actually, that's what the Paul's letter to the Corinthians says. He became sin. And God, because God is a holy judge, God cannot look on sin, so God himself turned his back on his son. Remember, I'm going to tell two versions, so hang with me. And in this picture, God put the wrath that humanity deserved on his son. He was separated from God. And in Jesus, this is the good news of the first version, in Jesus all sin died. When he rose, when he woke up that morning and came out of that grave, he left sin dead. And now Jesus not only changes our hearts, Jesus also changed God's heart. So God, who once poured out his anger and his wrath on Jesus, now has nothing but grace and mercy and love for us. This is the first version. You've heard this. I've heard this. This is the version that we've been telling in our culture for quite a few years now. This is a beautiful picture, and please don't hear me saying it's not valuable. If this is the only picture you have of God, it's enough. If this is the only picture you have of God, it's enough. It's been enough for countless people. Because even in this picture, God, it's the first time, I guess I have some more blocks, so I can go ahead and build this. Most people, when they describe God, most cultures, have a God who lives up here, and then we have certain prayers or incantations or sacrifices or offerings or laws or rules or all the way from hairstyles to clothing styles. We have things that we do to climb up, to get close to God, to be in his presence, to be whole, to be reunited. So almost every religion can be described with this picture. And then, of course, our steps are different. What thing gets you to the first step? In your religion, what takes you to the next step? So the difference in Christianity is that all of a sudden, you have a God. Where'd God go? There he is. You have a God who came down to be one of us. You have a God who doesn't live up here, but lives with us. Ho, 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 ho. It is a great picture of God. If that's all you have, it's enough. But I want to share an even better picture. Again, not better because it makes me feel better. Better because it more biblically represents the Son who said, I and the Father are one. If you've seen me, it's the exact same as seeing the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. His followers would say, Jesus is the exact imprint of God. Jesus is the exact image of the invisible God. Whew. Jesus said, I didn't come to condemn, I came to save. This Jesus doesn't kill enemies, he dies for his enemies. And this Jesus has no problem looking at sin, eyeball to eyeball. He doesn't turn his back on people. He walks into their houses. And then, he's even counted as a sinner himself. People accuse him of being a sinner, and he seems to be okay with it. That's the story I want to tell. It starts like this. In the beginning, God, represented by the little blue chair. Please, God is not a little blue chair. He's just, filling in for God. In the beginning, God created the world and everything in it by a word from his mouth. And of all the things that were things, the very best thing. That's right, that's you, that's me, that's humanity. The very best thing he made was us, and he called us his image bearers and designed us to carry his heart and his character. What an honor. I mean, seriously, what an honor to be an image bearer of God. But God is love, and love can't be forced. Love has to be chosen, so he gave his image bearers the ability to walk away, to slam the door, to walk out, and they did. you know what love looks like. Love is always being vulnerable to the other, and so God made himself vulnerable to his own creation. Can you even imagine such a thing? And they did. So Adam and Eve, they walked out. They shut the door. They said, see ya. Here's where the story is tweaked a little bit. God came after them, and he made them close. And he said, here, I want to cover you. I want to care for you. I want to protect you. Cain and Abel walked out, and God showed back up and said, Cain, what you're thinking about doing is wrong. Don't do it. It's going to hurt you, and it's going to hurt your brother, and it's going to hurt me. Because sin's not anything fancy or magical. Sin just means something that hurts you or somebody else. Cain didn't want to listen to him, so he killed his brother anyway. And even after that, God showed up. God came back and said, Cain, I'm going to put a mark on you. I'm going to protect you from violence. The story of God and people can be summarized much like this. People turn their backs, and God comes after them. People turn their backs, and God comes after them. God sends them prophets to share his heart, to warn them, to teach them. Some of those prophets they kill. So God gives them laws from his very mouth. This is how to live. And those laws are so progressive, most of them are still honored today. People are saying, we don't want your laws. Again and again, at a couple points, God actually takes his own people into captivity through another nation, hoping that they'll cry out to him, that they'll be able to experience the best life he has for them. And they say, no thanks. We like our gods of greed, sex, money, of power, of religion, again and again and again, until finally God sends his son, Jesus. Because he's a loving father and he's good. So finally he sends his son Jesus. Jesus wore the skin of humanity, fingernails and hair and eyeballs and teeth, and it was amazing. He did things nobody had ever seen before. It was incredible. He showed us what a perfect human could look like. He saw humanity as image bearers of God. See, he recaptured this original idea that you, out of all the things that are things, you're going to carry my image. And he treated people as if they did. Hugging a man who hadn't been touched in years because he had a contagious disease. Jesus gets right in his space and hugs him. And in doing so, he takes the disease himself and he heals him. He invited himself once to a guy's house who everybody hated because he was a thief. He stole money from them and worked for the occupying empire. Jesus invites him to his house, and in doing so, he says, these are my people. You are my person. And the guy, his life was changed. And he says, I want to be part of your crew today. Anything that I've stolen, I'm giving back even more today. And Jesus responds by saying, today, salvation has come to your house. Why'd salvation come? Because Jesus came. It's awesome. It's awesome. See, the idea that God has to turn his back on sin, that God can't stand to look at sin. I know where the idea comes from. It's a biblical idea. It comes from Habakkuk 1:13, where the prophet, who's very upset and disappointed, he's kind of crying out to God, and he goes, oh God, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You can't tolerate wrongdoing. That's where the idea comes from. And honestly, you guys, we would almost rather have a God that's up here, that we as humans bow to and sacrifice to and give offerings to. We would almost rather have a God sometimes that can't stand sin. Because if we were God, maybe we'd look like that. I mean, let's get real. If we were God, if I was God, my throne would be a little higher. Hello, I can't stand sin. Well, God can't stand sin. It hurts his heart. It breaks his heart. It destroys him. But that's not how the Bible describes God. That passage in Habakkuk 1:13, the prophet cries out to God and he goes, you can't even look at sin. And yet the next sentence he goes, so God, why do you? Why do you tolerate evil? It's a real question this guy's asking, because he's like, God, I want you to be here. But as I get to know you, you're right here. Why? Jesus gives us the answer why when he comes and not only stares sin in the eye, but he actually becomes sin. He's accused of being a sinner himself. Man, there's this beautiful place where there's a woman about to be killed by having stones thrown at her. And he stands in between her and the accusers. It's awesome. He stands in between them and he goes, yeah, if none of you have sinned, in other words, if none of you have ever hurt yourself or somebody else, throw the first stone, but you still have to throw it through me. Well, they all walk away, and he finally turns to this woman on the ground. And he says, woman, they're gone. They don't accuse you. They don't condemn you, and neither do I. That's God speaking. And he just says, go and sin no more. In other words, go and Don't hurt people. Don't hurt yourself. Don't hurt God. He shows up to another woman who was so sure that he would accuse her, that he would condemn her, because everyone else in her life had. These humans that she knew had been so hard on her. He shows up to her in John, early chapters in John, and we call her the woman at the well, and he says, actually, I'm not going to quote him word for word, but bottom line, he reveals himself to be God to her, and it's one of the first revelations. So she just drops her jug, she runs into town, she brings the whole village back, and he reveals himself to be God to everyone there. And one of the wildest parts is, man, of this story, they're a bunch of Samaritans. They're not even Jewish people. So in that revelation, in the early pages of John, John is telling us this God who is love is also saying this love is so much more expansive than anything you could imagine. This love is so free that it actually threatens the religious establishment. It threatens the political leadership. It threatens the financial system. We didn't know what to do with his joy, his freedom, his hope. So we killed him. Humanity, that's me, that's you, that's everybody that was actually present, poured out wrath, poured out sin, poured out violence on him. I mean, he was stripped, he was beaten, he was abused, while the Father, if the Father's like how Jesus describes in his parables, in his stories, the Father looks on. And the Father expresses love, reconciliation through Jesus. So the crowd expresses hatred, anger, accusation, and the Father expresses love and reconciliation. Father, forgive. That is a good story. And then it gets even better. He takes a breath from the dead and he walks out of that grave, and as he does, destroyed by the machine of humanity, as he does, he actually destroys the power of sin. That's things that hurt others, things that hurt yourself, and the power of death. What's most revealing about this, I love this, I'll never get over this. What's most revealing is when he comes back, people don't run away from him in terror. They run to him. Why would they do that? Here's why. Because if a man comes back from the dead, then his words come to life as well. And he described a God who doesn't kill his enemies, but who dies for his enemies. So people aren't afraid of him. When he's actually lifted up, he draws people to him. They understand that something magical has happened. But even more, they understand that Jesus was right and that he is the way to relationship with God. The book of Luke, he describes God as a shepherd who has lost one sheep. And then I love at the very end of this parable that Jesus tells us, it says he searches until he finds it, and then he throws a party. That's the God Jesus describes and then demonstrates. The same passage, basically, Luke's describing a God who is a woman. Come on, Luke. Who's a woman who's lost a coin. And this God, she goes after that coin. She stops what she's doing. She cleans her whole house. She gets down on her hands and her knees until she finds it. Come on, Luke. That's the kind of God that Jesus talks about. This God, he has a son who steals from him, who takes from him, who goes his own way as fast as he can. And this God that Jesus talks about says he's like a father who gets up and scans the horizon, looking for his son to return. And when he does, he runs to him with open arms. Come on, Luke. Come on, Jesus. That's the kind of God Jesus describes and talks about. And that, man, that is good news, because God, like this, will never stop pursuing you. God will never stop pursuing you. You can continue to turn his back because God is love, and love always gives choice. It's the definition of love. but he will always be coming after you. In love, in humility, in gentleness, looking like the kind of person that would wash feet and die on a cross. I think it's a great version of the telling of the gospel. It's very biblical. That's how you see Jesus draw out God, the heart of the Father. So I hope that is just clear and hope it makes some sense to you. Again, I'm not rejecting other versions. There's about a million ways to tell the story. I am praying and I am hopeful for a future where our faith in this kind of God, put on display by this kind of Jesus, just continues to grow. I hope that my faith continues to evolve so that one day I look back and I'm like, oh man, God is so much better than I thought. Like that second version I did all those years ago. Let me tell you, God is so much better.